All right, so we have some breaking news about Section 8 being in a crisis. I mean, the big beautiful bill passed on July 4th, as you know, and there's been a ton of speculation. I've seen a lot of videos out there about Section 8 being killed, being destroyed, etc. But what is actually in the bill? I want to know how it will affect real estate, housing, homelessness. And what I've found is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we're going to try to clear that out today. In this channel, we break down what happened, why it matters, and what you should do about it. And today, what we're going to talk about is going to be kind of like we're going to look at the big beautiful bill and break it down and what is in there about Section 8. We're going to go back also to kind of because a lot of that misinformation came from things that happened in the past. Project 2025, what happened in March with the executive order with Donald Trump, what happened with Scott Turner when he presented his budget in the committee. All these things are kind of like being kind of melted together, and then we assume that everything has been put into the big beautiful bill, and we assume that this is going to destroy Section 8. This is kind of partially true, but not entirely true. And then we're going to talk about so we're going to talk about the Scott Turner budget, what's in the big beautiful bill, and then we're going to talk about what do we do about that as investors, as individuals. So let's talk about the big beautiful bill and Section 8. Anything in there about Section 8? Actually, there's nothing in the big beautiful bill about Section 8. There's no provisions that alter Section 8 voucher policy, funding, eligibility, administrative rule. There's nothing at all. No amendment in the Housing Act of 1937, no changes in the HUD authority, no new work requirements, caps, funding, rescission tied to Section 8 in the reconciliation text. As you know, the House passed something, and then it went to the Senate. There was a bunch of changes there, and then it came back to the House and for the reconciliation. And then there's nothing in there for Section 8. So a lot of people are talking about how the big, beautiful bill destroyed or killed Section 8. This is not exactly true, and this is not what will eventually kill Section 8. We have to go back, I think, to Project 2025, which is kind of like the MAGA platform, whether they'd like to admit it or not. And this is kind of like what they're thinking. And you can see that, in everything they talk about. You're going to see that when you look at the presentation by Scott Turner, who is the secretary of the HUD. And then you're going to see when they speak, you're going to see that this is exactly what they're talking about. So Project 25, they talk about the general shift in the HUD mission. So the document advocates basically recentering HUD's mission to promote private ownership and reduce dependency on federal housing assistance, right? So it just criticizes the federal rental assistance program, and this is basically that Section 8 voucher, right? And they want to kind of like get rid of that, what they feel is the long-term dependency on that. But the thing is that people's wages are not increasing fast enough. They're not increasing faster than inflation. We have healthcare costs that are increasing. We have education costs that are increasing. People can't afford to buy a house. So if it's about that, then it's really not going to work. We're going to have some issues there. We also have a low inventory problem. So whatever you do, you're going to have to produce a lot of housing in order to do that. And I think some of the things that are being proposed, they are trying to do that, but I think we're far off the mark. Housing also is not a human right. So MAGA platform and Project 2025 are basically saying that housing is not a human right. So it is perfectly normal, and you should be, if you want to be homeless, it's perfectly normal to have homeless people. So I don't know why they're complaining then when we have homeless in all the cities, because they're thinking that housing is not a human right. So what does it matter if we have homelessness? So it rejects the concept of housing as a human right, opposes federal policy that prioritize tenant protections, rent subsidies. Yes, I think it has to be balanced. I think there are some areas where it has been too far. But anyway, Um, the ideological stance suggests that programs like Section 8 may be deprioritized, restructure, and then kind of like just basically cut down their budget. Recommendations that they had for the HUD reform, so they had specific recommendations for that, shrinking or consolidating federal rental assistance program, basically shrinking them, emphasizing self-sufficiency over long-term support, so basically capping how long you can stay. I mean, we all heard that they're talking about reducing or capping Section 8 for only a 2-year period, and there was negotiations around that. And then encouraging privatization and local control. So there's a lot of talks about moving that whole Section 8 program to the state and local authority, and then even have some privatizations in there. Because as you know, a lot of the Section 8 program is really a partnership between the landlords and the government. So these changes would likely impact both the housing choice voucher, Section 8, and the project-based rental assistance program. And then Project 2025 also talk about devolution to the states and the private sectors, basically moving it from the federal and pushing it down to the state, right? So push the whole responsibility of the housing assistance to the states and local authorities. This would fragment, obviously, the Section 8 administration, reduce uniformity, and then you would have different Section 8 program in different states. They could look dramatically different. So what would happen then is that you would have migrations of people that would go from one state to another, and it would be kind of like a race to the bottom. So that would not actually fix the problem. I think it would just complicate the problems and then shift the problem onto the states. And are the states ready to take that on? What is the plan for having the states actually taking that on? And then there's some critique around the affirmatively furthering fair housing. I think it's kind of like the DEI kind of ideas there, where they would basically, they're talking about social engineering and recommend eliminating it. This would likely reduce federal enforcement of fair housing protections. They want to get rid of, particularly like in suburban areas, they don't want to have low-income tenants or renters to come in there. They want to have their neighborhood homogenized and basically, kind of like stay within, everybody's kind of like the same, they make kind of like the same amount of money, etc., and they don't want to have that. They want to preserve that. I think along that this topic, I think that they're really talking about kind of like segregating different groups into their different neighborhoods and kind of like keeping it the same. But the whole thing is that Project 2025, as well as when you're going to talk about, Scott Turner's budget, it's all also about everything that doesn't fit into their ideology is considered waste, fraud, and abuse. So whenever you hear waste, fraud, and abuse, they're really talking about hey, that doesn't fit into ideology. I don't like what you're doing. Then it's a fraud, it's an abuse, and it's a waste. Now, executive order. So there was an executive order. You probably all remember in January 2027. So Project 25 was before 2025, right? It was in 2024 when this was a platform that they were running on and trying to pretend that they were not they were not associated at all with the Project 2025, but they're actually executing everything from Project 2025 in everything they do. So there was an executive order on January 27th, 2025, where there was a funding freeze for everything, right? So the Office of Management and Budget released a memo. They freeze 2,600 federal funding streams, and then but explicitly exempted assistance provided directly to individuals, right? So that would include the Section 8 vouchers. But the Section 8 vouchers, the HUD program was actually paused for one day, and then because of incompetence. And so there was a memo later on that rescinded that executive order. So the freeze was short-lived, but anyway, so it caused some problems, and also a lot of people, a lot of landlords that relied on Section 8 and tenants, then they thought, oh my God, Section 8 is going to be cut. So it was kind of like an interesting signal, I would say, for people that are involved in that. Now, May 30th, 2025, the Trump's budget proposal for fiscal 2026 has said it's not an executive order, but it was a proposal for the budget, and they were cutting a huge amount of money on the HUD program, right? So this is the White House. This is what they were proposing in terms of for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They were, the HUD programs, the block grant and stuff like that, they were reducing $26 billion, almost $27 billion on that. And a bunch of like $3 billion here, $1 billion there, $500 million, $500 million. So they were cutting a lot of things in as part of the HUD program. So that's what they were doing. So these were kind of like budgetary proposal, not actual orders, but I think a lot of people are still kind of like thinking that this is what's happening, that there was this budget that was proposed by the White House, and then it was basically, then it has to go through the cycle. So it has to go down to basically the HUD, the Secretary for the Housing and Urban Development, and then for him to propose the budget. So this is what Scott Turner's, and then in I forget when. I think it was in June 10 or June 12. Yeah, that's right. So he proposed the budget. So he proposed significant cuts to the budget, decrease 50% basically of the budget for HUD for fiscal year 2026 compared to fiscal year 2025. And he wanted to shift to the state-based rental assistance program. Again, this is exactly what we had in Project 2025, which was to move the things from the federal all the way to the state, push everything down to the state. So that means the Section 8 housing, choice vouchers, project-based rental assistance, and basically create new state rental assistance program. And so this proposed program would provide block grant funding to states, allowing them to design their own rental assistance program. So now we have all kinds of different situations in every state on how they handle people with low income and provide rental assistance to different groups of people. And then also a focus on economic independence and work requirements. I mean, a lot of the ideology is really that you should be able to handle your and pay for your own rent. But there are economic situations where we want the workforce to be live close to a city, for example, like in San Francisco. It's very expensive. If you're a waiter in San Francisco or you work in a kitchen in San Francisco, you can't live in San Francisco. You have to live like 2 hours away. But you want to have restaurants in San Francisco. You want to have restaurants in other parts of the United States. And then sometimes you can't get the people that you need to actually do the work. So expansion of opportunity zone is also something else that they were proposing, which basically helped. These opportunity zone gives tax advantages for investors who want to invest in some of these zones to really improve and renovate these distressed communities. And then typically these help provide more housing, more affordable housing for people. Deregulation and reduce barriers, basically reducing as much regulation as possible on construction, permitting, etc., to make it easy and cheaper to build affordable housing. Sounds interesting, but I don't know how much less permitting and construction inspections I want to allow. I want to make sure that the buildings and the renovations are done correctly. So I don't know about that. So the thing is that a lot of that, what Scott Turner proposed, was not actually fixing the problems, but more just shifting the problem to the states and local authorities, right? So the nice thing about this is that you can't take these cuts in isolation, right? You have to consider them as part of, Medicaid, cuts, the Medicare cuts, potential tariffs impact, like increasing prices for for people that are going to impact the low-income people a lot more. So all these things, it's not just, oh, I'm cutting this HUD program. It's everything else that you're cutting around it that's going to affect these low-income individuals. So these are not cuts that are just shifting more money. These are not just cuts, right? They're just shifting money from somewhere else. They're not saving any money. They're taking $45 billion from HUD, and they're putting it into Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, etc. So it's not like we're saving any money. We're just shifting it to something else. So, big, beautiful bill. What's in it? Well, there's no direct changes to this Section 8 housing programs. As I said, there's no budget cuts even, no shifts to the state, no provisions to alter Section 8 voucher program, no amendment, etc. So we talked about all that. There is an increase to the LIHC, which is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, from 9 to 12% permanently. So it gives tax credit to developers to help them build and rehab affordable rental housing projects. I've never done these programs. I try to do opportunity zones in the past, but you have to do a significant, basically a huge amount of renovations, basically at least 50% of that housing value you have to do in renovation. So it was not really practical, and the opportunity zones are kind of very specific. Low-income housing tax credit, also, that's something that sounds great, but there's a lot of red tape, a lot of paperwork involved in getting that there. I mean, where we invest, where I invest, I mean, this is the kind of thing that I could potentially take advantage of that, but it's too much red tape. I'm not really interested in doing anything like that. But it sounds great in general. So based on all of that, I mean, currently Section 8 is not actually touched. If you look at what actually is in the budget. So even though Scott Turner proposed that he's going to be cutting these things, the budget basically from the big beautiful bill is not. There's no cuts associated with that. But Scott Turner is still in charge of HUD. He decides how the money is going to be spent, and it's very easy for him to basically cut down and reduce the spending or not send the money to the different programs or freeze them. So even though the law is in there, the law allows him to spend 20, whatever amount, $100 billion in the HUD program, he can still reduce a lot of these stuff on his own. So how do we do it as an investor? Even though Section 8 program is not currently impacted, you can tell that everything is lining up for that. That the Project 2025 and the whole MAGA platform and Republican platform is about getting rid of that Section 8 program, moving it down into the state. That's one thing. And then we have Scott Turner, we have the president. All these things are kind of line up to get rid of it or do something with it. So it's clear that the Republican parties have their sight on eliminating Section 8. Even though it's not happening now, it's likely that's going to happen in the future. But unlike other programs, Section 8 needs the collaboration of landlords. So you can't just have, it's not like Medicare, Medicaid. Section 8, you need the landlords to provide the housing program and do the paperwork involved and the inspection involved to get that happen. Moving Section 8 to a state program, that means that the Fed would still probably set up the rules, but then it would give the impression that the Republicans did a great job reducing the federal deficit, right? But then you would pass everything else to the state, so that state would have to pay for these benefits. They would have to hire the staff and the people to manage this program that was kind of mainly managed by the federal government. That means that the state would have to increase state taxes. So on the face of it, the Republican Party at the federal level would look like they've cut the budget down, they've reduced expenses, but they really just shifted the expense down to the state on one hand, and the cuts that they're proposing, they're not moving them, they're not saving, it's not a saving, they're just taking the cuts, the money they saved, and spending it somewhere else. So they're also talking about if you're implementing stricter eligibility for participants, So that will turn landlords away, right? If I have a lot of Section 8 units, single family rentals. I'm also buying like 2 apartment buildings right now that have Section 8 vouchers, tenant. But as a landlord, as an investor, if I'm told that Section 8 is only for 2 years, then what do you think I'm going to do as a landlord? I'm going to start planning to get rid of Section 8 voucher tenants from my building. I want to have people that are going to be out of that. Also, the work requirement is going to be the same situation, right? If you lose your job, you're going to lose your voucher. That doesn't make any sense. The voucher is there to help you. So if you lose your job, you lose your voucher. So as a landlord, I'm taking the risk that I'm hiring tenanting or renting the apartment to someone, and if they lose their job, then they can't get a voucher. Or if they had a voucher, they lose their job, then they lose their voucher, then they're not going to pay the rent. What am I going to do? So I'm going to want to get rid of the Section 8 tenants because I want to have someone that is not going to be impacted by the voucher. So different. Okay, yeah, I don't know what that means. I used to think that. So my thought was. I used to think that because Kushner family was closely related to Trump through Ivanka and Jared Kushner, I thought that, and the Kushner family is heavily invested in Section 8 units, Section 8 rentals. So I thought that there was no way that Trump would actually cut the Section 8 program. But the thing is that Trump is the marketing appears to be the leader. But when you think about it, I mean, he didn't pay for it to be the president, right? A lot of people paid a lot of money to get him elected, and these people are fiscal conservatives and major GOP donors. They want a small federal government. They want reduction of the welfare state. That's the Koch brothers, the Heritage Foundation did the Project 2025, and a bunch of other people. That they want a small federal government, right? Then you have real estate developers and home builders that have also donated. It's like some of the major ones have donated, and we want new tax incentives that's through credits, deregulation as much as possible, and aimed at basically increasing private construction and housing. There are definitely states like in California, for example, where there's a ton of regulations about housing, and it makes it extremely difficult to do anything there. We also have a federal policy shifts, they're kind of like boosting the developers through the block grants and use public land. They're actually going to open up a bunch of public lands so that people can build on that land. If you have less public housing, voucher expansion means that more demand for private development, right? So that means that I'm going to be able to build more in some areas, build more housing and all of that, and that's going to help me as a developer. Policies explicitly streamline regulations, so you're going to remove, maybe like zoning, for example, and also permitting to lower the costs for the builders. For the rental investors, and so that means that you gain opportunities to acquire housing assets cheaply. Because if subsidized properties start to lose funding or they lose value, so then that way I'll be able to acquire these houses and a little bit more cheaply. I can also convert the affordable units to a market rent unit. So if I have a voucher at this level and then they're paying a tenant that's paying $1,000 for the unit, but the market rent is $1,200, I could get rid of the Section 8 tenant and increase the market rent. I could do that now, but now I have the advantage of having a guaranteed payment from the government. And if you get rid of that guaranteed payment or you kind of like add all kinds of restrictions, I'd rather have a tenant that, at $1,200 that has a job, etc. So that's it. So convert that. A more privatized rental market increases the customer base, right? So then you have all of a sudden, you have all tenants are paying market rents, not just the people that have jobs, and then Section 8 pays something else, etc. So that means increased market value. If I have an apartment buildings and all the rents are going up, the value of my building is that much bigger. For homeowners, so a lot of them believe that the property values and their neighborhood prestige will be preserved because it's going to limit the influx of low-income renters in the area. I mean, I have a lot of single-family rentals that have Section 8, and then some of them are not Section 8 also. But even if you're a homeowner and you have like 50% of the people in your neighborhood that are renting, whether it is Section 8 or not, it kind of reduces the value of the neighborhood, because the tenants are not taking care of the house as well, potentially, as the homeowners would. So when you're driving through, the neighborhood doesn't look as nice, and it reduces the value, the prestige of the neighborhood. So cuts that reduce vouchers align with the interest at keeping certain areas more exclusive, right? So if I have less vouchers, then these low-income renters, they're going to have to move to somewhere that's a lot cheaper. And that would kind of preserve a lot of people, they want to have like a homogeneous neighborhood, people that are the same kind of income, the same kind of level, and not mix in with other people. So this is what you should consider in terms of as an investor, as an individual. So if you're tired of being blindsided by the system and don't know what to do about it, so make sure you subscribe to this channel, and see you next time.